In patch 3.5 of Genshin Impact, Hoyoverse finally added chocobos to the game. Except this is a playable one, and his name is Mika. He wields a great many weapons, but is he a jack of all trades, or a master of just one? In this video, I'm going to be teaching you how to build Mika, as well as going over how good he is and when it's worth using him. And as usual, if you enjoy these types of videos, make sure to let me know down in the comments and by liking the video. And with all that being said, my name is Braxophone. Let's talk about Mika. Though Mika is a pretty niche unit, every single aspect of his kit is important to getting value. For example, his elemental skill is a buffing utility that requires you to think on the fly about how to get the biggest buff in the shortest time. It has two variants, a tap one and a hold to aim variant. With it, Mika pulls out a crossbow, and if you tap, he fires a bolt that can pierce through enemies and deal collateral damage. If you hold to aim it, his bolt will break into 3 shards on contact and home in on different enemies to deal cryo damage. Either way, when you activate a skill in any capacity, he gives an attack speed buff to your active character for 12 seconds. It's a pretty unique buff that works with tons of normal attacking characters. Now, the reason the tap or hold variant needs to be talked about is because of his first passive ability, which gives you a physical damage bonus based on the amount of enemies hit by Mika's crossbow bolt. If you tap his skill, every enemy hit by the penetrating bolt, meaning not counting the first enemy, will give you a stack of 10% physical damage buff up to a maximum of 3 stacks, or 30% physical damage bonus. With Mika's hold skill, every Rhyme Star shard that hits an opponent gives you the same, with a maximum of 3 stacks. In my personal experience with Mika, I found his hold skill to be better just because of how the homing shards guarantee that if there are 3 enemies nearby, they all get hit. Whereas with the piercing bolt, the enemies have to be lined up to make sure that the bolt goes through, and it can be harder to guarantee the buff. The downside is that by holding to aim, you'll lose a second or two of damage or field time, but the buff makes up for it a fair bit in multi-target combat. That said, if you're against a lot of enemies, or just enemies that aren't lined up, quickly using his tap skill can result in higher team damage technically, just because it's assumed you would get all the stacks of fizz damage bonus, but in less time. His skill generates 4 particles and has a 15-second cooldown. Do note that because Mika's buff only applies to your active character, if you swap off Eula early for her burst, she won't actually get to keep the physical damage for the explosion. Now, moving on to his burst, Mika is a healer, and as mentioned before, he's pretty niche. The benefit of Mika over Diona or Layla as a cryo support is specifically that 1, he works against husk enemies since you don't want shields against them, and 2, he buffs attack speed and physical damage, which are good for Eula. His burst deals a huge amount of healing to your team, and for the next 12 seconds, you can heal your active character by attacking enemies up to once every 2.5 seconds. Something you can do to get around the 2.5 second interval is to just swap characters, since the cooldown is based on the specific character that you're using. So each character on your team has their own 2.5 second cooldown, and you can swap through them to get extra heals, in theory if that's something you wanted to do. To be honest, I was pleasantly surprised to find out that his healing is actually pretty solid, and he definitely takes after Master Jean. Some people may disagree with that, but for me, I found that it was enough. As a heads up, since his skill has standard scaling, while his burst has HP scaling, it's pretty hard to get Mika to deal virtually any damage in a healing build, but even without a healing build, his damage is pretty low. The exception, of course, is with Shenhe, but a majority of players don't have her, so they may not have this opportunity anyways. With a 70 energy cost, his burst is a solid overall utility, and I recommend building for it. Mika also has a second passive that makes it so while both your skill and your burst are active, you can gain an extra stack of physical damage bonus, and the max stacks you can gain from Soulwind's effect, his elemental skill, is also increased by 1, allowing you to have a hypothetical 40% physical damage bonus at Constellation 0 in multi-target combat. For talent priority, both his skill and burst are important, and I would definitely level both of them. No need to level his normal attacks unless you play him as an on-field damage dealer, which I don't really recommend. Today's sponsor is one you've definitely, totally never heard of. In Raid Shadow Legends, you summon and command the strongest champions to defeat powerful opponents and claim victory. Raid is one of the few mobile games that has soloable and collaborative endgame content, while also being able to cater towards a PvP crowd. Join a clan, learn clan boss mechanics, progress your character with gear and upgrades, and discover the amazing character design that's drawn in so many players. I mean, look at Elaine, she's literally peak. Fun fact, Raid is actually an acronym that stands for Really Awesome In-Game Dungeons. Trust me, would I lie to you? The The answer is no. Raid has been around for over 4 years, and they're celebrating by giving out dedicated offers, such as free gifts, promo codes, and hosting events like the brand new Fusion event, where you can get your hands on an anniversary-themed legendary champion. If you've played before, there's also a recap of your stats that you can look at to see your journey in Raid. If you get started with Raid now, you can use my QR code on screen, or click the link in the description and pinned comment to receive a starter pack that has this cool in-game loot. Download now and discover the fun of Raid. As mentioned in the kit section, Mika's personal damage isn't great. I'm sure if you open TikTok, you'll see someone hit a bajillion damage on Mika, but one-shot damage showcases aren't accurate to how a character will play normally, and most of the time you're going to be putting Mika in a healing position. Since he scales on HP, you're going to be looking at HP and healing based artifacts, but you also want to have his burst on cooldown. Before AR45, you can give Mika something like the Exile set, since you don't want to spend resin on artifacts at that level. Exile will give you a little bit of energy recharge and help battery your team. However, after AR45, you basically put Mika in Noblesse jail. Noblesse is an artifact set that gives your team 20% attack bonus for 12 seconds after casting your elemental burst. And in Mika's case, since you likely won't be running him in teams where a different character would be using Noblesse, and because you're using his burst on cooldown before you start damaging on your physical characters, it fits him perfectly. There's just not another set that's better. Some folks may tell you to build a healing set on him, like Maidens or Clam, which can work fine, but Mika's healing isn't quite good enough to max out Clam's value. If you want to use a dedicated healing set, you can go for it. I honestly don't really care, but personally, I'd recommend Noblesse. Now for main stats, what works best is energy recharge or HP sands, an HP goblet, and a healing bonus or HP circlet. Healing bonus will get you more overall healing than HP, but either will be good enough. When it comes to energy recharge versus HP sands, it mostly just depends on the team and the content. I've been running 200% energy recharge with him, and I have his burst up on cooldown, but you can get away with less if you're bringing more cryo characters that generate more energy for him. In general, 200% is a safe bet though, and that's why most people will be doing energy recharge sands on him. For substats, lastly, you're just going to want to prioritize HP and crit rate because it plays into his weapon choice. When it comes to Mika's weapons, it's actually really simple to choose. Because his damage isn't really noteworthy, but his support capabilities are, you're going to want to build him for his burst or his scalings. For this, Favonius Lance is his best in slot option because it generates energy particles when you crit, and because it has an energy recharge main stat. Since Mika will be played with another cryo and or eula most of the time, he's going to have cryo resonance, meaning an absolute minimum of 20% personal crit rate. It will be easy to activate Favonius and battery either Mika or your teammates. Outside of that, you can go with any other energy recharge polearm, or if you don't have access to craftable ones, Black Tassel is a solid HP placeholder that will improve his healing output. Mika, though niche, can be a solid physical support character, and with the right build, you'll find uses for him. Though, like other 4 stars, his potential is limited at Constellation 0. So let's talk about what constellations he needs to be a top tier support for his niche. Mika's kit seems super good on paper, but his constellations are also pretty important to making the value in his niche better than just running other characters instead. Mika's Constellation 1 is mostly a quality of life improvement that shortens the cooldown of his active character healing. That 2.5 second interval gets shortened by the attack speed bonus, so it's affected by talent level. This makes the tech I mentioned earlier in the kit section a little bit less relevant because the time needed to swap characters can be matched or beaten by the time interval now. Basically, you heal faster. Not necessary, but it's a slight healing improvement. His Constellation 2 is a pretty big constellation for him and for your team, because it gives you a stack of physical damage bonus from the initial hit of Mika's elemental skill. Not from the piercing, not from the homing shards, but just for the contact of the skill itself. It's an extra stack just for using his skill and making contact with an enemy, and that's pretty good. Constellation 3 increases his burst level by 3, which is a pretty solid healing increase. Again, quality of life. Constellation 4 helps Mika's energy a little bit by having him get 3 energy back when his active character's healing procs. This can make it slightly easier to run in HP sands for even bigger healing while still being able to get his burst on cooldown. Constellation 5 is bigger than a lot of people realize, because by increasing his elemental skill level, you're also increasing his attack speed buff. On Mika, you can only reach 25% attack speed if you have Constellation 5 on him. Attack speed is a rare stat in the game, so even a 3% difference can be pretty noticeable. Constellation 6 basically turns Mika from a support that works with eula into one of the best options to run with eula. It increases the amount of stacks of physical damage bonus you can have at a time by 1, which means up to a maximum of 5 stacks or 50% physical damage bonus to your active character. On top of that, it gives characters in Mika's burst 60% more crit damage on specifically physical damage, kinda similar to Sara and Goro, who give electro crit damage and geo crit damage respectively. If you want him for your eula team, C6 is insanely good and basically a must-have to make him the support he's trying to be. Mika is usable at C0 like most characters in Genshin, but I'd be lying if I said he didn't get much better with Constellations. And that's pretty standard, but math's been done to show that in some instances without C6, you may actually just be better off running other supports or damage dealers that could make up for Mika's effectiveness and more. So the TLDR on Constellations is that they make him feel a lot better. Pulling for 4-star Constellations is a gamble and I don't particularly recommend it, but if you do find yourself with a C6 Mika, it's definitely worth building him to replace someone in your eula or other physical damage dealer team. But let's talk about that more, because some folks are going to overshoot his value and I don't want to give you the wrong impression. Let's make this clear. Mika is an incredibly niche support that was built specifically to battery eula. Speed up eula's attacks in her burst to give her more stacks, give physical damage to eula, heal eula in Husk Floors of Abyss, and increase eula's physical crit damage with Constellations.
Vengeance will be mine!
Unless there's another physical damage dealer whose burst massively increases its damage based on how many times you hit during the burst period, and you also can't use a shield with that character, it's pretty clear that Mika was intended to make eula better. That doesn't mean that Mika can only be used with eula though. You can use him with Razor and other physical damage dealers, even Xinyan. The problem is more so that outside of eula, his niche of buffing physical units and speeding up normal attacks isn't strong enough to justify it in most situations, especially at C0. Also, though you can get up to 5 stacks of physical damage bonus with a C6 Mika, in most content you may only see 2 to 3 stacks on average, and because his damage is low, in a lot of cases running a different combination of characters can actually lead to better team damage. My content is about trying to get the most out of characters, and so obviously I want to explain how to use him, but I don't feel right lying about his power level either. You can also play him with characters like Wanderer and Yoimiya, who both benefit a lot from attack speed. Is it better than Yunjin, Bennett, Xingqiu Official, or other characters we've already established are good for them in the past? Not really. It's possible, and it's funny, but it's not good. Overall, my verdict with Mika is that I think it's cool that he fills the physical support niche, and he's definitely good at healing. He also generates a decent amount of energy, which is what he needs to do. I'm pleasantly surprised at his functionality. He's not a character that you need to build, but if you do build him, he'll do the job. But one last thing that everyone should know is that if you're playing eula's best team, Mika is actually a DPS loss. I mean, you can't hyperbloom with 2 cryo characters.